Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is Mike Davies, and in this tutorial I'll be showing you how to take a subject from one photo and place it into another photo using GIMP. I'm using GIMP version 2.10.30, which is the latest version of GIMP at the time of this tutorial. Before I get into that, guys, don't forget to check out my website at daviesmediadesign.com. You can enroll in my GIMP 2.10 Masterclass from beginner to pro photo editing on Udemy, and you can get more by becoming a DMD Premium member, and I'll include a link to this as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. So I'll be using a couple of free photos for today's tutorial, and come over here, this is the group photo, and go with the large option and click free download. And then I also use this photo here. This is going to be the guy we're going to place in the background. So come over here and once again go with the large option and click free download. Here is the final composition we'll be creating, and this is the final composition without some color grading I added. So there it is with the color grading. So let's dive right into this process. We're going to start by opening up the original photos that we downloaded from Pexels, and to do that I'll go to File, Open, and find the images from my computer, or in my case I can go to File, Open Recent because I did open these up recently, and here I'll go with the first photo of the subject and hit Convert. And I'll also open up the group photo here, so File, Open Recent, and here's that group photo, and I'll click to open that up. And in both cases I'm going to click Convert. This is just converting this to GIMP's native sRGB color space. So we're going to place our subject right here in the background. Of course, there are some people standing in front of him, so we want to make sure they are obstructing him to make sure that looks nice and realistic. So to start this process off, we're going to come back over here to the photo of our subject, and we're going to outline the subject in order to get rid of the background. And what I recommend when you start this process is come over here to your layers panel and just duplicate the original layer by hitting the duplicate icon. And now I'm just going to brighten this up a little bit so that it's easier to see the areas where the background and the foreground subject meet. In this case, it's already pretty easy to tell, but you know, just in case you're using a photo where it's not easy to tell. So I'll go to Colors, Levels, and I'm just going to very quickly brighten this up a little bit. We're not going to keep this, so it doesn't really matter how this looks. So once we've done that, we're going to come over here to the toolbox and grab the Paths tool. And I'm going to hold Control and zoom in with my mouse wheel. And all I'm going to do is sit here with the Paths tool and just outline the subject. And this is just going to tell GIMP that this is the area we want to keep. And I'm using the spacebar as a hand tool. I do have an entire tutorial dedicated to how to remove a background in GIMP using a simple workflow. It's using basically the same method. I also have a tutorial dedicated to mastering the Paths tool, which I recommend you check out if you haven't already. And that way you guys can see how the Path tool is used. This is a pretty tedious process, so I'm not going to go through it all right now. I have already done this ahead of time. So let's come over to the composition where I've done this ahead of time, and I'm just going to hide the layer that I brightened and come over here to the original. And if I come over to the Paths tab, you'll see this is the path I drew, so I can always unhide this, and there we could see the outline around the subject. And if I hold Control, zoom in, and click on this path using my Paths tool, which is still selected, you can see all the nodes I created there. But what I'll do once I've created a path around this is just come over here and click Selection from Path. If this option isn't available, it means you probably don't have the Paths tool selected. That's okay, you can always just come over here and use this icon here, Path to Selection, which will also create a selection here. Once I have the path outline selected, I'll come over here to the Layers panel, and we'll come over to the original image layer, right-click, and go to Add Alpha Channel. That just makes sure there is transparency behind here. And then I'm going to right-click again and go to Add Layer Mask. Under Initialize Layer Mask 2, I'm going to choose Selection and click Add. And now we have this layer here where the background is masked out. I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect that. It's the same as going to select none. And if you want to get rid of the nodes here, just grab a different tool like the Move tool. So now we have this layer here with the layer mask. What we're going to do is click and drag this over to our group photo and come over here and just make sure we're hovered on top of the photo itself and release. And that will give you your layer with the subject as well as the layer mask, and that way this is nice and non-destructive. So making sure we're clicked on the subject layer itself and not the layer mask, I'm going to hit the M key to grab my Move tool, and I'm just going to move this into place. So right now he's way too tall, he looks like a giant, and what I'll do to mitigate that is hit Shift S on the keyboard So that's going to grab my scale tool over here from the transform group. And then you'll see these little transform handles. Click and drag them inwards. And if, like mine, you don't have the little chain link locked over here right now, hit Control Z and hold the Shift key while you drag. And that will make sure that it maintains the aspect ratio of the original image and thus won't make it look all squished. And the preview is going kind of slow right now. The reason for that is I have composited preview checked. You can always uncheck that if you want to speed this process up. And once again, we're going to just adjust the size of this. So because he's standing in the background behind all these people, but he's a little bit taller, I have to sort of get the proportions right for his height. You know, I don't want him to look giant, but I don't want him to look too short and disproportionate. So probably right about here will be good. And we can always scale this down a little bit later. That looks pretty good, so I'll just hit scale. All right, once that's scaled, the next thing we're gonna do is we're going to edit this so that the luminosity of this photo matches the luminosity of the photo behind him, the original photo. To do that, we're gonna hit Control D on the keyboard, which is going to duplicate our composition. I can also do that by going to Image, Duplicate. So we have 2 copies of this composition now. And on the second copy here that we just created, we're gonna go to Image, Mode, and we're going to change this from RGB to grayscale, and that's going to change this to black and white. And what this does is it makes it a lot more obvious as to what we have to do to get the luminosity of this or the brightness contrast to match the image behind it. So while we're on this layer still, now we're going to adjust those features by going to Colors, Curves. So here we have the Curves tool, and now we're just going to play around with this. And basically the top portion here is shifting the white point. So sometimes you got to drag it inwards and drag it down just so that the whites aren't too white in this photo here. Or maybe we want the whites to be whiter. And then we're also going to click and drag this portion of the curve. This is going to adjust the highlights up here. Down here, it's going to be the shadows. So you're just going to play around with all the settings until things start to match up. And so this down here is shifting the black point, which means we are making the black pixels in this layer here slightly less black, less dark. And in this case, that's helping it to match with the layer below because the layer below is a bit flatter. It doesn't really have as much contrast. Therefore, the black point is shifted a little bit. This is definitely the part that takes a little bit of practice because you can very easily end up with a poor final result or with the wrong final result. So as you can see here, it's maybe not perfect, but it's definitely way better than it was before. Let's just play around with the white point here. So yeah, we don't want that to go too bright. Most of the brighter pixels are on the forehead there. I think that's going to be pretty good for now. So once you're happy with that, come over here and click OK. And of course, this is the copy. This is the duplicate image, so it's not doing anything to our original image. What we want to do is come back here to the original. We're going to click on this layer here, which is our subject layer. And if I hit Control F, it's just going to repeat the effect we just placed on this other image. It's the same as going to Filters, Repeat Curves. So it's just adding those same features or those same settings we just added on the Curves tool. So now it's starting to look like it matches a little bit better. The main issue though is that the color here does not look great. So we're gonna use the Levels tool, or you could also use the Curves tool, but in this case I'll use the Levels tool. So I'm gonna go to Colors, Levels. So here we have the Levels tool. We've already adjusted the value channel here inside the Curves tool. That's what we just did in the last step. So now we're going to go over to the red color channel, and we're just going to try to adjust the colors until they match better. And once again, this is something that requires a little bit of practice, and it's even something that I'm not totally versed in. So here we're on the green channel, and anytime you are adding the opposite of green, you're adding magenta. So by dragging this in, we're adding magenta to some of the shadows of the image, and you don't want to add too much magenta there. And if I come over here to preview, there's a before, there's an after so far. And by the way, the opposite of red is cyan. But now if we come over to blue, we're either adding blue or we're adding yellow to this. And by the way, I do have an entire tutorial dedicated to the Levels tool, how to use the Levels tool in GIMP, so definitely check that out if you haven't already. But in this case, we're adding some yellow to the shadows, and here we're adding blue to the highlights. Here's a before, here's an after. Sometimes you got to adjust the output levels as well. This is basically saying all the pixels that are this dark and darker are basically going to be blue, and all the pixels that are this light and lighter are going to be yellow. And you can always come back to the value channel and tweak this if you need to. And actually in this case, I'm just going to leave it as is. So come over here and click OK. So we're going to continue making color adjustments to this. The next tool I'll use is Colors Hue Saturation. And this tool is going to allow you not only to crank up the saturation of the entire subject image here, which is what I just did, but you can also adjust the lightness of it or the hue, which is going to be the color. I'm not going to touch that for now. So anytime you do it straight out of the gate like I just did, you are adjusting all of the colors of this layer. However, you can also come over here to the individual color channels and make adjustments. So for example, I can go to the red color channel, and if I turn that all the way down, all the reds will become desaturated. And if I turn it up, we're adding some saturation to the reds. And similarly, you can adjust the lightness of just the reds. So you can kind of cycle through the colors here, see where saturation needs to be increased or decreased, if at all, see where the lightness as well can be adjusted. And you don't always need to adjust individual color channels, but in this case, I found it was helpful to adjust the red color channel. All right, once you're ready, come over here and click OK. And I think the last color adjustment I'll make to this before we start masking out our main subject so that he's obstructed by the people in front is I'm going to come over to Colors, Color Temperature, and we're going to adjust the intended temperature. So right now he's a bit too warm, which means he's a bit too yellow. So by adjusting this to the left, we add just a tinge of blue there, and that is very mild, that adjustment there. All right, so I'll click OK. So next we're going to mask the subject out, and to do that I'm going to come over here. We already have one layer mask here on our subject layer, and by the way, let me rename this subject. Hit the Enter key, rename this group, hit the Enter key. So what I want to do to add another layer mask to our subject layer is come over here and add a layer group, and then I can click and drag the subject into the layer group. And now I can add a layer mask directly to the layer group itself, and therefore we will have two layer masks here on a single layer. So I'll right click on here and go to Add Layer Mask, and I'm going to go with Black Full Transparency, which is going to hide that image. So when I click Add, now the image is hidden, and what we're going to do is grab the Paths tool, hold Control, zoom in, and like I said, we're going to outline the areas where our subject here needs to be obstructed. And I can always right click on here and go to Disable Layer Mask. I can also Control click on this, and that's going to toggle that Disable Layer Mask option, and that way I can quickly see what areas he's overlapping, which allows me to see where I need to start. So right here is where I need to start. And so I'm going to come over here with my Paths tool, and this part I will go through in its entirety. So I'm just going to very quickly, using the spacebar as a hand tool to move over, I'm going to outline the hair. And as per usual, the more time you spend on this, the better this is going to look. If I hold the Shift key and release, that gives me an individual handle there I can control. Control Z, make sure you come up here and include all of the parts of the hair. And we'll try to remember to come back to that part right there. And if I come back here, Control click, we can see his shoulder ends right here, which means we don't need to go beyond that point. So let's Control click. And this is another part we're going to have to come back to. And so I think right there is going to cover it. All right, so we're going to hold Control, zoom out, and we can basically go like this and just bring this in and hold Control and click and come over here, Control click to make sure. So yeah, we got everything there that we needed to. So Control click on that again. So we have this area we just created with the Paths tool. I'll come over here and making sure my foreground color is set to white, I'll make sure this is set to Fill Path and click that option. And here we'll go with Solid Color and click Fill. And that's going to fill this area in with white. So if I grab a different tool, I can see the parts where he is now being obstructed. And of course, we have to hold Control, zoom in, just double check. So in this case, I left this part out because I thought this was the hair. So we have to click on here, grab the Paths tool, and you can also use a brush tool for this. You get all that, hold Control, click, and again, choose Fill Path and click Fill. And we'll come over here, same thing, hold Control, click to create a union, choose Fill Path. And then let me grab the Move tool, hold the space bar, and I can move over here, hold Control, zoom in, and again, grab the Path tool and we'll fill this in. So we have to do the same for the lower portion here. So control click. So he's gonna overlap all of this. So we're gonna make sure we outline all of that and then parts of right here. So hold control click, hold control zoom in. Let's do this part real quick. Control click just to double check. And we're gonna close that off. Click fill path and click fill. Let's move over on the image, hold control. So we pretty much have to do this whole area. So hold control, zoom in, and let's actually start with this small area here. And what you can do, hold control click, you can either fill this again from here, or if you want to leave that and just have this have the same setting as the next path, hold the shift key when you click to create your next node. And now these two paths are going to have the same properties. So I'll hold control, zoom in, and now we can just outline this area here. All right, so I've created a union there by holding control and clicking to join the last node with the first node. So I'll hold control and zoom out with my mouse wheel. So now you can see these three areas have been selected or have been outlined with the paths tool. And I think this area we already filled in. But now once again, I can come over and click fill path. Make sure this is set to solid color once again and click fill. And now we can see the leg coming through here. And this area as well has been filled in. So that should be all of the areas. Actually, let me hold control, zoom in. I do need to control click. So yeah, part of his shoe comes through here, which means I just need to quickly fill this in and come over here, click fill path. So now I can grab another tool like the move tool and just get recentered up here. So now that we can see him obstructed by the people in front, we can kind of gauge whether or not we've scaled him properly. So what you can always do is come back here to the main image, the subject, and hit Shift S to grab the scale tool. And you can always just scale him either up or down, making sure you're holding the Shift key if you don't have the little chain link locked over here to maintain the aspect ratio. And I think he was pretty good, so I'll hit scale. All right, so just to finish this off, I'm gonna add some finishing touches to this, including some sharpening, some shading, as well as some color grading. So we're just gonna click on here and go to Filters, Enhance, Sharpen Unsharp Mask. And we're just gonna try to match the sharpening. I think in this case, the radius is turned up too high, and that's why we're getting a bit more contrast around the edges of our subject. So that's not really what's going on with this photo here. So I just turned the radius down, but I could still increase the sharpening a bit using the amount. So there's a before, there's an after, very subtle if you can see it on the recording here. Maybe add a bit more radius, and I'll click OK. And let's come over here, make sure we're still on the subject layer, click to create a new layer, and I've already got this named shading. Fill it with transparency and click OK. I'm going to swap my colors here so that black is going to be my foreground color. Grab the paintbrush tool, and I'm going to increase the size of the tool. I have the hardness turned way down here as well as the force. And what I'll do now is hold control, zoom in. I'm just going to paint anywhere where I want some shading because he is behind all these people. Presumably the light would be blocked, if ever so slightly. And then hold control, zoom in. So his back leg here, we can pretty much darken. Now, one issue right now is that you've got some of the shadow right here spilling out. So what I did was come over here and just change this to overlay, and that way it's going to interact with the image layer here below. So there you can see the result of that. You can always darken this a bit more. I don't think we really need to do that. And I'm just going to try one more adjustment here to the subject. So I'll go to Colors, Shadows, Highlight. And I'm just going to adjust the shadows here, see if that does anything. So I'm going to shift the white point here to make him a little brighter and click OK. You can always do one last check with Control D to duplicate and then go to Image, Mode, Grayscale. So that fits in pretty well there. I'm sure there are some minute tweaks we could make to this to make it fit even better, but that's going to be sufficient for now. So we can exit out of the grayscale duplicates. And for the last step, I'm going to go to Layer, New from Visible, And let's click and drag this to the very top of the layer stacking order. And now we can add some color grading to this, and it's going to add color grading to all the elements here, which will help everything blend in. So one way to do that is to go to Filters, Gimmick QT. This is an external plugin. I have an entire tutorial dedicated to how to download and install this plugin for both Windows and Mac. But here we have color presets, so just come up here and type color presets, and I just went with this random preset, so pixels.us, expired 69, and you can always play around with the settings here. I'm just going to leave them at the defaults, and I have the output set to new layers, which means the final result will be placed on its own layer. So I'll come over here and click OK. Here is going to be that new layer. So that's without the color grading, that's with the color grading, and there's our final composition. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and click the bell icon to be notified each time I have a brand new tutorial. You can check out any of the links to my resources in the description of the video. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.